Colonel Potter, sir. My last wish is to be buried in my mother's wedding gown.
I've seen these Dodgers for 40 years. All the tricks. Dismissed.
Why did some of MASH's biggest stars walk away from one of the most iconic shows in TV history? Was it money? Ego? Something darker behind the scenes? The truth is more shocking than you think, and it wasn't always their choice. From sudden exits to bitter clashes and secret heartbreaks, we're pulling back the curtain on what really happened. Stick around, because you're about to hear the stories Hollywood never wanted you to know. Asterisk. Imagine trying to picture American television without MASH. It's nearly impossible. This wasn't just a show people watched, it was something they lived through week by week. It didn't simply entertain, it dared to challenge everything we thought a sitcom could be. Set against the chaos of the Korean War, but premiering during the tense final chapters of Vietnam, MASH arrived in 1972 and rewrote the rules.
She said I had an unhappy love affair. So I said, was it one of my doctors? She said, no, it was your priest.
Audiences were drawn to its humor, yes, but they stayed for something deeper. The aching humanity, the emotional rawness, the way it held a mirror to the absurdity of war, while never forgetting the souls caught inside it. It felt real, too real sometimes. But while the show offered its viewers consistency and warmth, backstage, things were constantly shifting. As storylines dove into heavier themes and characters were given more depth, tensions quietly simmered. Stars left one by one. Was it artistic differences? Were personal ambitions getting in the way? Or was the show simply evolving faster than everyone could keep up? What unfolded off-screen was often just as dramatic as what aired each week. To truly understand what led to those departures, we need to rewind. Not to the premiere, but back to the origin story. MASH didn't begin on a television screen, but in the pages of a novel written in 1968 by a Korean war surgeon named H. Richard Hornberger, under the pen name Richard Hooker. His book MASH, a novel about 3 army doctors, was a sharp, witty, and at times brutal recollection of war through a lens rarely seen, one that balanced dark humor with moments of startling tenderness. It didn't take long for Hollywood to come knocking. Just 2 years later, director Robert Altman brought the story to the big screen. The movie MASH*, starring Donald Sutherland and Elliot Gould, wasn't just a hit, it became a cultural event. With its irreverent tone and sharp satire, the film spoke directly to a country worn thin by conflict, winning awards and acclaim. But no one was ready for what would come next. In 1972, CBS reimagined the story for television, and something remarkable happened. The series, crafted by Larry Gelbart and Gene Reynolds, brought new life to the concept, injecting warmth, character arcs, and emotional storylines that made it more than just a comedy. Alan Alda stepped into the role of Hawkeye Pierce and quickly became the soul of the show. But the start wasn't smooth. Ratings were dismal, and the show nearly faced cancellation after its first season. Yet with a move to a new time slot, MASH found its audience and its place in history. MASH was never afraid to take risks. Helicopter sounds replaced laugh tracks. Real war footage found its way into storylines. The format was flexible, and so were the emotions. Alda, a natural leader both in front of and behind the camera, pushed for authenticity, transforming the show into a rare blend of humor and heartbreak. But as his influence grew, not everyone welcomed the shift. It was here that some cast members began feeling the ground shift beneath them. Some felt boxed in, watching their characters get trimmed down or lose depth. Others yearned for something more, something that let them stretch their creative wings. One of those people was McLean Stevenson. Fans of the show remember his final episode like it happened yesterday. The season 3 finale delivered a gut punch no one saw coming. In a moment that rewrote the rules of TV drama, Radar walked into the operating room and quietly announced, "Lieutenant Colonel Henry Blake's plane was shot down over the Sea of Japan. There were no survivors." One line, total silence, and a nation stunned. Stevenson had played Henry Blake from day one, a lovable, sometimes bumbling commander with a good heart and bad timing. He wasn't flashy, but he grounded the madness. His warmth gave the show balance, and fans adored him. But behind the scenes, Stevenson wasn't happy. He'd grown restless. In his view, the show had become the Alan Alda hour. Hawkeye's role was expanding rapidly, and McLean, once a central figure, found himself on the sidelines. He admitted as much in interviews. He wasn't chasing fame for ego. He just wanted a shot at being number one. In his heart, he believed he had what it took to carry a show. So he took a leap. He told producers he was leaving after season 3. That choice, one bold move, set in motion a series of events that would make TV history. Most sitcom characters get gentle farewells. They move away, change jobs, start new lives. But Mass *H wasn't most sitcoms. Producers decided to honor the show's wartime setting and let the story reflect the grim realities many wanted to forget. Henry Blake wouldn't get a cozy send-off. He would be lost, suddenly, tragically, and without fanfare. And that's what made that scene unforgettable. For 25 minutes, it felt like any other goodbye episode. Hugs, tears, laughter. But when Radar stepped in with his face pale and his cap in hand, everything changed. There was no music, no comforting laughter, just silence, and the quiet sound of lives being changed in real time. What most people don't know is that only a handful of actors knew what was coming. The raw reactions on screen, those were real. The episode drew thousands of letters. Some praised the show's courage. Others were furious, feeling betrayed. But the message was clear. Not everyone gets to go home. For many, that one moment was the first time they realized how powerful television could be. But what became of McLean Stevenson after he left? At first, things looked promising. He signed a major deal with NBC, launched the McLean Stevenson Show, and for a while it seemed like he was finally getting the spotlight he craved. But the magic didn't stick. The show was canceled after one season. A follow-up attempt, Hello Larry, was widely panned and mocked for years. In time, Stevenson himself admitted that leaving Mass *H might have been the wrong move. He chased a dream many actors do, the dream of leading man status, of headlining your own world. But the truth is, lightning doesn't always strike twice. Sometimes, the role that defines you is the one you should have never let go. He once told me, "They treat me like I'm not even there." And I could see it, the toll it was taking. For a man who had created such a beloved, almost mythic character, Gary Berghoff was quietly crumbling behind the scenes. And here's where it gets even more heartbreaking. He didn't just walk away from fame. He walked away from something he loved because he couldn't hold himself together any longer. That's the part fans never saw. He gave everything to Radar, and Radar gave everything to the show. The moment Gary left, the dynamic shifted again. There was no Radar to signal the helicopters, no quiet smile in the background anchoring the chaos. His exit was written as a bittersweet goodbye. Radar was going home to care for his family. But for those on set, they knew this wasn't just about writing out a character. It was a man saying, "I can't keep doing this," and everyone respected him for it. This wasn't a creative disagreement or a contract issue. This was personal, raw, and deeply human. And if you're wondering, did he ever regret it? The answer is, maybe. Gary made a few guest appearances after leaving, even trying a spin-off that never took off. But ultimately, he stepped away from the spotlight, choosing instead a quiet life far removed from the noise of Hollywood. He painted, he fished, he raised his children. And when asked in a rare interview what Radar meant to him, he paused, smiled, and said, "He was my better self." Now that's a line that sticks with you. It's the kind of sentiment that tells you everything without saying much. And that's the essence of Radar. Gentle, unassuming, and yet unforgettable. When Gary passed in his later years, the tributes weren't loud or extravagant. They were tender, subtle, much like the character he portrayed. His name may not dominate headlines today, but among those who truly loved MASH*, Radar is eternal. But Gary wasn't the only one fighting internal battles while making people laugh. Another departure, equally complex, came from David Ogden Stiers. Known for playing Major Charles Emerson Winchester III, David brought something entirely different to MASH*. Arrogant, brilliant, and yet weirdly lovable, Winchester was unlike any character before him. He didn't seek attention like Hawkeye or mischief like Trapper. He brought class, culture, and oddly enough, compassion. But here's where things twist. David joined the cast later after the original lineup had already carved out their legacy. Stepping into that kind of environment isn't easy. There's pressure to fit in, to find your space. And for David, a classically trained actor who spent more time on stage than in front of a camera, that pressure was enormous. But he pulled it off. Over time, Winchester became a fan favorite. Not because he was charming, but because he was layered, wounded even. And that complexity came straight from David himself. Behind the scenes, David was reserved, not cold, but guarded. And there's a reason for that. He lived with a secret for most of his career, one he didn't publicly acknowledge until much later in life. He was gay. In an industry that wasn't always kind to those who lived outside the lines, David kept much of his life private. But you can feel that emotional depth in every scene he played. His performances weren't just acted, they were lived. In later interviews, David admitted that he never felt fully safe being himself in Hollywood. That's not just sad, it's infuriating. Because when you watch him on MASH*, you see the brilliance, the heart, the ability to make even the most arrogant character somehow sympathetic. And yet, behind the talent was a man who spent decades wondering if he'd ever be truly accepted. The irony? Fans loved him more for being vulnerable than perfect. There's a lesson in that. When MASH* ended, David went on to have a prolific career. You might recognize his voice from Disney's Beauty and the Beast, where he played the butler-turned-clock, Cogsworth. That performance? Pure magic. He did voice work, stage work, guest starred in dramas, and always carried that quiet grace with him. He passed away in 2018, and Alan Alda's tribute said it best. He was a great actor, a gentle soul, and he gave us Charles with a depth no one else could. Every cast member brought something unforgettable to the show. But what's even more unforgettable are the reasons they left. Fame wasn't enough. Applause wasn't enough. For many, MASH* wasn't just a show. It was a season of life. Beautiful, painful, transformative. And like any chapter worth remembering, it eventually had to end. Sometimes we look back at these shows and think, why did they walk away? They had it all. But the truth is, what we see on screen is just a sliver of the full story. Behind every smile, every line delivered perfectly, was someone grappling with identity, family, mental health, or purpose. That's what makes their stories so powerful. Not just what they gave us, but what it cost them to give it. And as fans, maybe that's the real tribute. Not just remembering their characters, but understanding the people behind them. Because the deeper you dig into these stories, the more you realize that the greatest performances often come from the most fragile places. And that's where the true legacy of MASH* lives. Not just in the jokes or the drama, but in the humanity behind it all. He never expected the farewell to hit so hard. For Gary Berghoff, stepping away from MASH* wasn't just a career decision, it was an emotional breaking point. After years of playing the beloved Radar O'Reilly, the pressures mounted. Behind his gentle smile and twitchy innocence was a man quietly unraveling. The producers, aware of his value, bent as far as they could, offering fewer episodes and more personal time. But sometimes, even generosity can't stop a heart from saying, enough. Gary had outgrown Radar. He needed to rediscover Gary. And when he finally bowed out in Season 8, MASH* didn't let him vanish unnoticed. His farewell wasn't just written, it was etched into television history. Goodbye, Radar, unfolded like a slow goodbye to a generation's youth. He came back to find the camp falling apart. And just as he once held it all together, now he let go. The teddy bear left behind on Hawkeye's bed? That was more than a prop. It was the symbol of Radar's last whisper. That moment didn't just tug at heartstrings, it pulled them taut. Fans didn't just miss a character, they mourned a piece of themselves. Gary faded from the spotlight, resurfacing briefly in a spin-off that never quite took off. But Hollywood wasn't where he belonged anymore. He poured his energy into painting, nature preservation, and even held patents. Yes, Gary became an inventor. The boy who once listened for choppers turned his ear to the natural world. And when asked, he said it simply, I left for my family, I left for peace. The industry had his talent, but life had his soul. And then there was Larry Linville, whose Frank Burns wasn't just a character. He was the embodiment of dysfunction. Self-important, rule-bound, and painfully insecure, Burns was the kind of man you loved to despise. Larry nailed the role with such brilliance, it became a double-edged sword. As the show matured, Burns didn't, and that stasis wore on Larry. By Season 5, he had enough. With Grace, he declined to renew his contract. No conflict, no scandal, just a man choosing integrity over redundancy. And in doing so, he opened the door to evolution. Without Frank's over-the-top villainy, MASH* pivoted toward moral complexity. Larry's exit became a turning point. Though written off quietly in the script, his absence screamed through the DNA of the show. Post-MASH asterisk, Larry took on roles in film and TV, but Frank Burns remained his defining legacy. He was never just a punchline. He was the tension that made the laughter necessary. As Burns exited, another man entered. The cultured and cold Charles Emerson Winchester III, played with stunning nuance by David Ogden Stiers. Unlike Frank, Winchester didn't beg for laughs. He challenged. Arrogant but brilliant, detached yet oddly humane, his character peeled back layers slowly. He wasn't a villain, he was a mirror. And David brought him to life with a kind of quiet fire. He stayed until the very last episode, choosing depth over departure. His farewell, teaching POWs to play Mozart, was one of the most poetic moments ever broadcast on TV. It whispered, rather than shouted, the truth about war. Even the proud are broken by it. When offered a place in the spin-off, David declined. Winchester had said what he needed to say. Few actors ever get to close their chapter so deliberately. Off-screen, David's courage was just as powerful. In 2009, he publicly shared his truth, something he'd long guarded in fear of how Hollywood would react. "I am gay, very proud to be so," he told Gossip Boy. At a time when authenticity could still end careers, David stood tall. His career included Disney voice roles and dignified performances right until his passing in 2018. But more than any line delivered or note voiced, it was his integrity that lingered. And in a show often driven by its male ensemble, one woman refused to be background noise. Loretta Swit, as Major Margaret Houlihan, transformed from a caricature into a cornerstone. At first, Hot Lips was little more than a joke, a name pulled from a gag in the original film, but Loretta wasn't having it. Each season she pushed for more depth, more dignity, more truth. By the final episodes, Margaret had become a force, an officer who challenged injustice and embodied strength in a world full of boys trying to stay sane through jokes. Loretta stayed with MASH asterisk from pilot to finale, one of just 4 to do so. In a cast that saw so many come and go, she stood firm. And in doing so, she rewrote what it meant to be a woman in a wartime comedy. Gary Berghoff's lifestyle today is a quiet contrast to his fame. But in the rare glimpses fans get into his world, they find a man surrounded by nature and comfort. Over the years, Gary invested wisely. His primary residence, a rustic estate nestled in Connecticut's quiet woodlands, features sprawling acreage, custom-built studios, and eco-friendly systems. Though not one to flaunt status symbols, he once drove a classic Mercedes-Benz SL convertible and wore an understated Rolex Datejust. Rather than chase luxury, he built a sanctuary. His ventures included licensing his inventions, collaborating with conservation groups, and creating limited edition art prints. Reports suggest he held comprehensive insurance policies, covering intellectual property, healthcare, and even fine art. If there's one financial lesson from Gary's path, it's this: simplify, protect what matters, and invest in peace of mind. Fame fades, but wisdom compounds. As the curtain closes on this journey through MASH's legacy, one thing remains clear. These weren't just actors. They were architects of emotion, builders of stories that stitched humor into heartbreak. And while the battlefield was fictional, the impact was real. Whether walking into the Korean night or quietly saying goodbye off-screen, their exits taught us how to let go, with grace, with meaning, and with a story worth remembering. And there you have it. Behind the laughter, the uniforms, and the legendary theme song were stories of heartache, bold choices, and some unforgettable exits. From McClane's quiet dignity to Wayne's clash with fame, every departure from MASH asterisk left a mark, not just on the show, but on TV history itself. If you love diving into these hidden Hollywood moments, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe for more behind-the-scenes drama, and drop a comment with your favorite MASH asterisk memory. We've got more untold celebrity stories coming your way soon, ones that will surprise, move, and maybe even shock you. Because sometimes the most powerful goodbyes happen off-screen. Thanks for watching. And remember, in showbiz, the exits can be just as legendary as the entrances.